Welcome back to our continuing series of videos on the 2013 NCAA Men's Basketball Championship, March Madness, NCAA Men's Basketball Bracketology. We're into the most important video in the series now, my video where I talk about my Elite Eight, Final Four, and National Championship game matchups. So again, where I have the two brackets are slightly different, but there are some locks across both brackets as far as teams making it into the Elite Eight. Just as a reminder, my Elite Eight matchups are as follows. In the Midwest region, I have number 1 Louisville and number 2 Duke playing for the Midwest Region Championship. In the West region, this gets a little weird. On my Fuck Canada the Fourth bracket, I have Gonzaga and Belmont playing for the West Region Championship. But, however, on my other bracket, my Bridgewaters Finest, I have, we're just doing a little movement here, number 4 Kansas State playing number 2 Ohio State in my Elite Eight matchups. So any one of those 4 teams out of the West region, I think, are pretty strong plays to head towards the Elite Eight. In the South bracket, my Elite Eight matchup, I think it is a lock that number 1 Kansas will play number 3 Florida for the South Region Championship. And in the East region, I think it is a lock that number 1 Indiana will play number 2 Miami of Florida for the right to win the East region and go to the Final Four. So, in the Midwest region, I said it was a lock that Louisville, number 1, was going to play number 2 Duke. But as far as I'm concerned, that's really a coin flip, as I mentioned, between those two teams. On my Fuck Canada the Fourth bracket, I have Louisville winning that game against Duke, but on my Bridgewaters Finest bracket, I have Duke winning that game against Louisville. So the winner of the Midwest region, I feel, is either going to be Louisville or Duke. If I had to put a gun to my head, I would say Louisville is where I'm leaning in that game. In the Midwest region, again, on my Bridgewater's Finest bracket, I have number 1 Gonzaga taking on number 11, I believe it is, number 11 Belmont, and in that game I have Gonzaga winning the West region and going on to the Final Four. However, again, if you look at my Bridgewater's Finest bracket, I have number 4 Kansas State playing number 2 Ohio State in that matchup to win the West bracket, and in that matchup I have Ohio State number 2 going on and winning the West bracket. So I think you can ride either number 1 Gonzaga or number 2 Ohio State, probably leaning a little more towards Gonzaga there, but again, it's just a really pivotal game there, that Gonzaga versus Pittsburgh game in the round of 32. I think if Gonzaga wins that game, I think they're going straight through, but if Gonzaga loses, that opens that door there for number 2 Ohio State to get through and win the West region. In the South region, I said it was a lock that number 1 Kansas is going to play number 3 Florida, and in that game I think it is a lock that number 3 Florida dethrones number 1 seed Kansas, winning the South region and going on to represent them in the Final Four. And finally, in the East region, again, I said it was a lock. The number 1 Indiana would play number 2 Miami of Florida. And in that game, I think number 1 Indiana beats number 2 Miami to win the East region and represent them in the Final Four. Here are your Final Four matchups. Now, on my Bridgewater's Finest bracket, again, where the Midwest and the East are kind of weird. On my FC the Fourth bracket, I have number 1 Louisville from the Midwest taking on number 1 Gonzaga from the West. And in that game, I'm actually going to take the Zags. I'm going to take Gonzaga in that game to beat Louisville and represent that side of the bracket in the NCAA Men's Basketball Championship game. However, on my Bridgewater's Finest bracket, of course, I have Midwest number 2 Duke taking on West number 2 Ohio State. And in that game, I actually have Duke. So I think Duke can beat Ohio State, and in that scenario, they would represent that side of the bracket in the NCAA Men's Basketball Championship game. But I'm leaning towards my Fuck Canada the Fourth bracket, so I'm leaning towards saying that Gonzaga will beat Louisville and represent that side of the bracket. On the right side of the bracket, I don't think it is nearly as confusing. I think South number 3 Florida takes on East number 1 Indiana, and in that game I think East number 1 Indiana beats Florida to represent that side of the bracket in the NCAA championship game. So as far as I'm concerned, NCAA men's basketball championship game, you are going to have East number 1 Indiana taking on either Midwest number 2 Duke or West number 1 Gonzaga. And in either case, I have East number 1 Indiana winning the NCAA men's basketball championship. If they play Gonzaga, I'm predicting a final score of Indiana 67, Gonzaga 65. If they play Duke, I'm predicting a final score Indiana 65, Duke 61. In either case, I'm taking Indiana to win the NCAA men's basketball national championship. Now, in all of these videos that I've done, I want to hear who you think is going to win. I want to hear who you think is going to win each of these games in the regions, if you want to go that deep into it. But in the regional videos, in this video about the Elite 8, Final 4, and National Championship game, I want to hear your predictions. I want to know who you think is going to take it all down. This is just my personal opinion, and again, in a lot of these, it gets kind of wonky depending on some of the earlier matchups in the tournament. So I want to hear your opinion. I want to hear what you think is going to happen in these tournaments. That's it for me. Justin, Bridgewaters Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter. Going to be coming back here in a couple of weeks to give you an update video about how my brackets are doing. But until then, enjoy the games, and we'll see you later.